So I just wanted to do a quick vlog about, this isn't going to be a principal vlog, it's just something that I've been noticing for many years. I'm sure many of you, if you've ever done any kind of real fighting, etc., there's a couple of things in general martial arts that I think fail the overall martial arts community. I mean, completely do not represent combat at all. And it's the difference between skill development versus, well, let me rephrase that. It's a difference between learning the technical components of skill versus learning the application of a skill. And you know, one of the big things I see pretty regularly is this idea of range control, right? We talk about distancing, right? So you use, if you're in Filipino arts, you're going to use, you know, short, medium, long range, corto, medio, largo, and that's cool. Like, I get it. If you're in JKD, you're very familiar, if you're at least in the Inosanto line, with those types of terminologies too. You know, long, medium, short range. And a lot of arts have assumed that same kind of tone and conversation about it. But generally speaking, what I see happening and what I think is not communicated very well, right? Like in the majority of martial arts circles, is that, and for sure in instruction, is this idea of, well, in PSP we don't worry about whether it's short, medium, or long range, right? Because at the end of the day, what you call it doesn't frickin' matter. It doesn't matter if you think you're a long range fighter, or you think you're a medium range fighter, or you think your system is short range. What really matters is what tools you have that you're comfortable with using combatively, and that you can bring to bear when you don't have control over another person. So essentially, you don't always have the option of choosing what range you operate at. What you do have the option of doing is learning how to open that range up again, and or learning how to control some of it from the start. But what I see generally happening in martial arts is that often, you know, some random percentage, 80%, 85% of the time, training takes place like this. Two people line up, and there's an assumed space, an assumed agreement of range, and it's based off of whatever technique you're working, and then you just start. And generally speaking, if you never have a conversation about that, if you never address how to bridge, if you never address how to range control, to me bridging is one of the things that I think PSP does fantastically. And we focus, and that was intentional on my part, is to focus exclusively on bridging for the majority of your early training. You need to understand what your spatial awareness, spatial relationship is. Develop your spatial awareness. And you can't do that if you don't concentrate on it, because there's too much assumed distancing in martial arts. That is a huge, huge thing that I think martial artists fail at. We can have really good techniques, we can have the best methodologies, theoretically, but if somebody comes crashing in on you, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to adjust that? What is your plan of failure for that? If you don't plan to fail in range control, then you'll never know how to control it, open it, close it, whatever, adjust it. And so, you know, there are a lot of different ways to do that. This isn't a tutorial, but you know, in certain spaces, you know, you'll get to a range where if you're fighting a larger, bigger, faster opponent, they're going to close the gap on you, and you're going to be overwhelmed by the space, or the lack of space with their size and their strength, and potentially their skill, depending on who they are. This is one of the biggest struggles I had early on, fighting, in a lot of ways, was learning how to fight a larger, bigger, faster opponent, and hitting them, right, and getting the hell out again, and or not being hit, and still hitting them, and because what I found happened a lot is you end up close enough to hit them, but then they were close enough to grab you. And if they were close enough to grab you, they could overwhelm your strength and shut your power down. If your movement's shut down and your power is shut down, you don't really have a lot else. You can make up all the, like, I'm going to elbow them like this all you want, but when somebody closes that gap so tight and they're strong, that little elbow might do nothing. Or there's the potential you could distract them with it. You're damn sure not going to knock them out if you can't move well. So you have to learn how to open up space, and you have to learn how to control space to begin with. That's the best, right? The best solution is control the space to begin with, right? This is the thing. This is the difference between you see it in MMA when you have a boxer versus a grappler, right? The thing is, they look at space different. So a boxer wants to keep a gap in there that's sufficient for their skills, right? A Muay Thai fighter, again, could be slightly different. And then your grappler is going to be wanting to close, right? And those are very different ideas of space. And if you don't understand it, then you need to watch closer, because it's out there in a lot of different forms. But when you see a demo on martial arts and they're just all standing there, yeah, you can tell me it's for the demo. You can argue that you're just learning techniques, you're just showing stuff, whatever. But if you don't have any foundational method for learning to bridge and control space, then regardless of what you say, you're not doing your students a justice, and you're not doing yourself any justice by pretending you have that covered. A lot of times space is not always our friend. For example, you're in a nightclub. I don't do a lot of clubbing anymore. I'm getting old and fat. Nobody cares. But you're in spaces where there's not a lot of room, and maybe there's a lot of people. Range is completely out of your control to some extent. You can pretend you're going to have a 3-foot range around you, that operate in, but you're probably not. And so these are things that you need to work on and figure out solutions for, because there's no time like in the middle of a fight to understand that you didn't control space. So getting grappled or taken down or any of that stuff, it often is because you didn't control the space, the range. And so you really just need to spend some time. A lot of times I'll use, you can use footwork, you can use angles, you can use alignment, such as straight arming somebody, right? That can create and control space. No, I'm good. Yeah. And then you can use structure like using, how your body can contract, right? So a lot of people don't think about things like that. If I'm standing very close to you and I need to elbow you, then I can't just do a normal elbow, where I'm normally leaning in and driving and hitting and all that stuff, What I might need to do is I might need to draw my shoulder back, do this first, right? When my whole shoulder engages, and then lean back, contracting that motion. So those are ways to, there's a few quick ways that you can, worry about or help control or mitigate range issues. But footwork is huge. We don't spend enough time on it. We spend too much time in stances, in my opinion. Being mobile, being adaptable, figuring out how to make space. Sometimes if somebody crashes in on you, one of the methods I used to use quite a bit on a bigger, taller, stronger guy is to use structures like my elbow here. So drive straight back into my shoulder and my frame, so that there was no way that he could collapse on my arm, at least not very easily. So I would at least have this much room between here. So lining up like this did not allow this to collapse. Whereas if I had let him collapse and I was trying to push this way, he'd be able to compress me together this way. So, just think about those things. There's a lot of study, I think, to be done in range control and bridging, controlling the bridge, adjusting the bridge. You're not going to get the bridge right in a fight. That's assumptive. And so, how do you plan to adjust? What is your method for adjustment? Those are things that I think pretty critical in martial arts, and one of the most neglected areas, particularly in martial arts that I see today. So, thanks.